Your Life, Spirituality. This is session 4 of our 7-session course on spirituality. This is on knowing, or, excuse me, but your knowing is showing. Do not believe what you have heard. Do not believe in tradition because it is handed down many generations. Do not believe anything that has been spoken of many times. Do not believe because written statements come from some old sage. Do not believe in conjecture. Do not believe in authority, teachers, or elders, but after careful observation and analysis, when it agrees with reason and it will benefit one and all, then accept it and live by it. The key word in the above passage by the Buddha is believe. In fact, the key phrase is do not believe. Everything you carry around with you that you may call a belief has become yours mainly because of outside testimonies of others. And did you ever think that if it comes to you from a source outside of yourself, shouldn't you receive it with some question marks or doubts? Let's take an example. If I were to attempt to convince you of the smell of a wonderful perfume, maybe you would listen to the words I would speak, but wouldn't you still have your doubts? If I showed you pictures of the beautiful bottle that housed the perfume and maybe even had hundreds of people testify as to the wonderful scent, you might become more convinced. In fact, this is how television would attempt to sell you the perfume. But wouldn't your doubt still remain? Why? Well, you hadn't smelled it. You might accept the truth of the scent from me if I was a trusted friend or acquaintance, but until your nose experienced it, wouldn't your truth be only a belief based upon my truth and my experience? And isn't this the way with all well-meaning members of your community, your family, your friends, your tribe, even their ancestors? What is the Buddha telling us? And here we're looking at the Buddha not as a religious leader, but really a philosopher. And what he's saying is essentially, just because you've heard it, or it's a long surviving tradition, or it's recorded over the centuries, or the world's greatest teachers, even the Buddha, have endorsed it, those are still not reasons to accept something as a belief. Remember, do not believe it. What if you replaced the word belief with the word knowing? When you have direct experience of, let's say, smelling the perfume I spoke of earlier, don't you then have a knowing? That is, you have conscious contact, and you can determine your truth based upon your experience. Think of this. You know how to brush your teeth. You know how to take a shower. Why? Not because you have a belief, but because you've had the experience of doing those things. There's a fundamental difference between knowing something and knowing about something. Knowing about something is really another term for belief, isn't it? Knowing, however, is really reserved for a direct experience. And that really means an absence of doubt. In our lives, we're constantly being reminded of what we should or should not believe. We may get this from every source, from the media, to those around us, to our family, to our peers, to our friends, to our social media, to our digital world. The bottom line is what all of our tribal members have always believed is what we are constantly being reminded of. And we're also being reminded of what will happen to us if we choose to ignore the beliefs of our chosen group with which we identify. What happens here? Fear becomes the constant companion of your beliefs. And despite the doubts you might have about beliefs, because after all, these are things that are given to you from others, not from your own experience, nevertheless, you'll often adopt them and make them crutches to your life. You'll muddle through your days looking for a way out of the traps that have been set by perhaps generations of believers in the same beliefs before you. Think of this in contrast to what the wisdom of the Buddha stated in that passage at the beginning of our session. Here he offers you some great advice, and you can see that his conclusion is devoid of a particular word, isn't it? There isn't the word believe in it. What this great philosopher says is what it agrees with reason. That is, when you know something to be true based upon your observations or your experience, and it's something you find that's beneficial to yourself and perhaps to all, then and only then should you live by it. Now, resisting the influences of your tribe or your family or your peers or your friends or your community can be perceived as being insensitive to the experience and teaching of others, particularly to those who care most about you, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your siblings, your other family members. And if you're finding this as true in your life, maybe you should consider rereading the words of the Buddha. Perhaps reread them as many times as necessary. Because he doesn't speak of rejecting your roots or your community or your family or your friends or your peers or your tribe or any other group to which you feel you have a belonging. What he is suggesting is being mature enough to take personal responsibility for living by your beliefs or knowings versus living by the experiences, the testimony, and the beliefs of others. What are some thoughts here you can consider? First, consider exposing yourself to belief systems, even those that are in opposition to those with which you are familiar. I'm going to tread on dangerous ground here. I often avoid political discussions in modern America because we don't seem to have civil discussions any longer. But for purposes of our thoughts today, if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, think about looking at the belief system of a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, what if you thought like a Republican for a bit? Or even more in opposition, what if you are a libertarian and thought like a socialist or vice versa? Expose yourself to belief systems that are in opposition to those with which you are familiar. We're not saying to adapt them. We're not saying to challenge anything you're doing. We're saying to simply expose yourself. Experience what it is like to walk in the shoes of those who are different from you. The more of these contrary experiences you allow yourself, the more you'll know your truth. Don't be seduced into arguments on the basis of ideas that have been put upon you by perhaps well-meaning others. In other words, stop giving energy to the things you don't believe in or know to be inapplicable to you. And finally, remember, because beliefs are such an integral and huge part of your life and any desire to change or improve your life, know that this is something that is not only incredibly important to you on your spiritual journey, it's indeed important to you in every facet of your life. And know that this is certainly not the last you'll see of beliefs in this course. Be prepared. Well, we've prepared an exercise as part of this session to put the wisdom that we've seen here in this session to work in your life. And when you're done with that exercise, we look forward to catching up with you again in our next session, session 5 in the Your Life Spirituality series, which is on love.